Alright, hello and welcome to this build guide. This is for a Poison Lich farm build. It's the last in my series of farm builds for each base class. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, a Poison Lich, how unique, how original. But let's be realistic here. It's really hard to make anything out of Lich that's not poison, and so if the formula works, and it works better than the other formulas, why stray too far from it? So we're going to go with what works well. And so that's what this is. This is a Poison Lich, and it's going to do a lot of poison from a lot of sources. And it's a fun build to play. It's a pretty active playstyle. You definitely have to be paying attention to what you're doing, and I think that makes it fun. So with that, let's go into what the pros and cons of this build are. So first off, the pros is excellent damage, both single target and AoE. You won't struggle to kill anything in Monolith, at least really if you want to take an arena either, although it's not meant for that. This will take out anything. There's nothing that will survive this for very long. It also has great mobility. You can put a lot of movement speed on it, but even beyond that, it has 2 movement abilities, and they're both actually used for damage and for healing as well, so they fit multiple purposes. It rarely needs to stop and rarely wants to stop. You can just run through enemies and they will probably die just from you running through them. And so that makes it very easy to go through monoliths quickly, still clearing most of the trash, but not really spending much time working on it. It has 2 health bars since we are using Reaper form, so if you get knocked out of Reaper form, that does not mean you're dead. You can continue to go on. It also has very high leech, which of course helps with survivability. Now, what about the cons? Because some of the things we mentioned, the pros, actually lead to cons. For example, yes, you have Reaper form, which gives you 2 health bars, but if you lose Reaper form, that's bad, because Reaper form does give you that extra survivability. It allows you to move around more quickly, it increases your damage, and it has a pretty high cooldowns. If you're knocked out of it, you have to wait 20 seconds to get back in. You also need to keep hitting things. This is directly related to having Reaper form, because to maintain Reaper form, you need to leech. And to leech, you need to be hitting things. And so if you take some time to look at some gear and you're not hitting anything, that can be bad. You can get knocked out of Reaper form, now you gotta wait 20 seconds. The build also requires a unique. Specifically, it requires Plaguebearer Staff, which can be somewhat of a pain to farm, and it definitely makes this build not beginner friendly, because you've got to get that staff, and also you probably want a pretty well rolled one, which is, there's no guarantee the first one you get will be that. And last, it requires decent poison protection and regen, so that you're not dying from Aura of Decay, which is one of the skills used in the build. So you have to get a good balance between the poison protection and the regen, so when you're using it, you're just kind of being stable. So that can take some time, and it's best done with some idols, and so you might have to farm those. All right, that covers the pros and the cons of this build. So going to player skill, where does this stand? I think I'm gonna say this is probably somewhere in the advanced, not expert. I don't think this is an expert build. There are the uniques you need to get, there are the idols you probably want, but that doesn't make it an expert because those things aren't that hard to get. The only thing that would make me think maybe a little higher is managing Reaper form can take some skill, but it's honestly not that much skill. Once you get the hang of it, just continuously move around, make sure everything's dotted up, you're good to go. So this is I think pretty comfortably in the experienced. You can't do it as your first build. You're gonna have to farm some stuff before you can play it, and you'll have to get used to the build, but it's not gonna take you that much. All right, how about what we should look at going forward as far as future patch considerations? So this one, like my previous Primalist build, has the small concern of poison getting a small nerf. How that will affect this build is unknown, but because we do know that the nerf is expected to be small, the devs believe it's going to be small, I don't think it's going to affect this build all that much. And we also have the benefit of not using any of the really truly OP stuff in the game, like Death Seal. One area of somewhat concern, though, on the skills is right now Wandering Spirits being in the build is able to put a whole lot of damage out with poison darts, and I could see that getting nerfed because of how much damage it ultimately can do and how easy of a skill it is to use. You literally just auto cast it. So those are the 2 concerns going forward. I don't know how bad those concerns are. Even if Wandering Spirits got nerfed hard, the build would work. It would certainly not be as effective, but I probably would still use it as my farm build. So I think it's relatively at least future-proof for the time being. Not too much to worry about. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the skills and specializations. Let's take this from left to right, and we'll start with Rip Blood. Rip Blood is going to be primarily used on transplants, but it can also be used on single targets just actively. You can just use it on those single targets to kill them more quickly. We're going to build this out as if we're going to transplant 90% of the time or so. So the benefit the most from that, we are going to take Splatter and Eviscerate so that we get double stacks of blood splatter every time we use this skill. And we'll use this skill 3 times on transplant per cast. And then we'll take Crimson Flood to increase the blood splatter area by 175%. Once we've done that, we will take Revile for more blood splatter hit damage. And then we'll just go in and take Septic Blood for 100% blood splatter poison chance. That should get us a lot of poison every time we blood splatter, and we're going to blood splatter a lot every time we transplant, and so this is going to be one of our main damage sources. From there, let's go ahead and look at transplant and see how this is all working out. We're going to take 1 in Acolyte's Fervor, which will get us 2 Dance of Blood, which is where we get 3 Rip Blood casts per use of transplant. So there's where all of our damage comes from. Well, not all of it, because we do have some other sources from transplant. We have Rain of Blood, which gives us a detonation on arrival. Then we're going to increase the area of those detonations, and then we're going to add 2 more detonations. Also going to take 3 here on arrival. So we've got a whole lot of detonations. We've got blood splatters going off, a whole lot of attacks that are going to apply poison every time we transplant. All right, from there, we're going to go up. Well, let's also take Sticky Blood while we're at it. Get a pool of blood that slows enemies. And then we'll go and take Bone Armor, which is going to give us a good source of damage reduction. We'll take Apostasy to make that Bone Armor last longer. And we will take Drink Deep, which regens the health that transplant costs over a period of time. All right, from there, looking at Reperform, this is our second health pool. It also does a few other things for us. The right side here is to keep up Reperform. The left side is to do more poison damage, generally. So Mistress of Decay decreases the health drain while we are in Reperform, so it allows us to maintain a higher uptime, but it also increases our damage over time, which of course is great for poison. We're going to take 3 in Blood Tethers. It has a chance to retaliate with Blood Tether when we are hit. Blood Tether will leech, and leech is something we have a lot of in this, so that's going to be a solid way of maintaining Reperform. And then Harbinger of Blood increases our health leech, healing effectiveness, and Reap health is gained when we use Reap. From there, we'll go down to the left side. We'll take Death Touch Scythe, which really just gets us to some of the other nodes. We're going to take 2 in Sweeping Scythes, increasing the Reap range. So you go farther. It's actually more of a movement skill than anything. We're going to take Haunting. That's really going to get us into Pestilence. Poison chance on enemies hit by Reap. And then Venomous Coating increases the poison chance further and the poison duration from Reap. And finally, 3 of 5 in Herald of Rot. So we apply poison stacks to nearby enemies when we transform. But more importantly, we get an increase of 30% global poison chance. All right, next up is Wandering Spirits. This is going to do a ton of poison damage, and it's going to do it basically passively. You move around, Wandering Spirits pop up. They start shooting poison darts at enemies. Those enemies, of course, are poisoned, and they die. So we'll go over here to the right side first. This is definitely the most important side of it. Souls of Rage increases their movement speed and damage. The big thing we want here, though, is Spectral Putrescence, which is how they shoot poison darts at enemies. So we're going to give them an increased frequency of 30% with Soul of Filth, and then we're going to increase their range by 40% with Spectral Scorn. Next, we're going to take Poison Mines to give them a multiplier on their poison damage. Then we're going to try to create more Wandering Spirits over a longer period of time. So we'll take Thin Veil, 4 out of 5 points for reveal rate. We're going to convert their damage from necrotic to poison. We're going to take 1 in Lingering Souls to increase their duration, and then 1 in Spirit Swarm to decrease the cooldown recovery speed of Wandering Spirits. And last but not least, we have Aura of Decay. Our primary purpose here is just to apply more poison. So we'll go over to the right with Rotweaver to increase the ailment frequency. We will take 1 in Seeping Wounds to increase the bleed chance, which is going to get us into Mana Blight. Again, increases the ailment frequency. And then we will take 1 in Poison Soul to once again increase the ailment frequency. Now, you might look at this and say, well, why didn't you take a Carrion Poison instead of Seeping Wounds? It increases the ailment frequency further. And the reason for that is because Carrion Poison will kill you. Carrion Poison increases the poison that you put on yourself over a period of time that is indefinite. Eventually, if you keep on Aura of Decay, this will kill you. So the playstyle for this would require you to get out of Aura of Decay, come back in, get out, come back in. This is a farm build. It's much simpler to not use a Carrion Poison. And honestly, a Carrion Poison is pretty dangerous even if you play it well. And so we're not going to take that at all. All right, now we're going to go down to the bottom. We're going to take Plague Rat for an increased area of 60%. Finally, we'll move on to the left side. We're going to do this a little differently than I've got it here. I've got to update this and just haven't. This is a pretty minor thing, but right now I've got Absence of Life. I've got Vulnerability. Frankly, Vulnerability is pretty useless. Minus 30 poison protection is really bad. So what I'm going to suggest we do is just take 3 points of inoculation, get poison damage down by 6% on yourself, then continue with this as is, 2 points into Loathing, and 3 points into Poison Skin. We really want Poison Skin on this side. Anytime an enemy hits us, they're going to take 9 poison stacks. We're going to take 3, but that's going to be fine. We're going to be able to handle 3 poison stacks easy. They're not going to be able to handle 9. That's just a lot of poison. So that should kill most enemies that hit us relatively quickly. And that covers the skills and specializations. Let's move on to the passive tree. The passive tree is going to be largely about leeching and poison damage. Unfortunately, the base class doesn't have a whole lot of good options. So we'll grab some armor from Bone Aura. Then we'll go up and take Stolen Vitality to get some vitality, a little bit of protections. And we'll finish off with Putrid Demise. Chance to poison nearby enemies on kill. We'll be killing things often, quickly. So this gives us a little bit of a chance to stack some extra. Plus the poison protection is quite nice for this build. And from there, we will put all our points into the Lich tree, starting with Survival of the Cruel, where we get 40 health, but more importantly, 4% Spell Leech. We'll take 3 in Wraithbringer for the chance to create Putrid Wraiths, which will also poison stuff. From there, we'll take Desolation for the increased damage over time, and 8 of 8 in Lasting Stench for the increased poison damage and poison duration. We'll take 7 of 8, excuse me, in Bed of Souls for vitality and increased health regen. We'll go back and take the last point there later. We will take 1 in 3 Plagues, which is really only to open up Contagion Engine because penetration right now really sucks. But Contagion Engine is really good, increased damage over time on recent kill. Then we will take 10 of 10 into Decaying Form for the 130% poison chance. I did take about half of this at first, and then I took some of the top stuff before that. But you can take more of this early if you want to. Just be wary of that increased poison damage taken. It's a little easier to handle that with some of the higher tier nodes. So let's look at those. So we have 8 of 8 in Ageless Ascetic. This one gives us attack speed, cast speed, movement speed, and leech. All really good for a farm build. We've got 5 of 5 in Soul Maw for a ton of health leech here. And then we have 8 of 8 in Corrosive Consciousness for increased spell damage and increased damage over time. Now, once you've got all those, what do? Well, like I said, we'll go back and take Bed of Souls for the additional vitality and health regen. After that, our options honestly are not very good, so we'll just look for some stuff that gives us a little bit more defensive option. We're going to go into Necromancer, take 8 of 8 in Elixir of Hunger for a little bit more health. This honestly is a pretty bad node, but all of our options at this point are pretty bad, so this is the best of the bad options. And then we'll go ahead and take 8 of 8 into increased health regen from Blood Armor. At that point, you're just about done. I think you got like 4 more points to spend if you make a level 100 character. I'll leave that up to you to decide what you want to do with it, because honestly, your choices aren't very good anyway. It's not going to much matter. By the time you're about level 80, that's where your build really has come together, and the majority of your power is already there. All right, let's talk gearing. For the most part, this build is relatively easy to gear. There is one required unique, which is your staff. Of course, that is the Plague Bearer staff. Pretty much any spell-based poison build at this point runs this staff, and it makes a huge difference in power. Even though you can technically run the build without it, you have to find other sources of chance to poison on hit, and this one provides so much that it really is a huge power jump for the build. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, a necessary item to make this build work as it should. Outside of that, things get much easier to get. So on the offensive side, poison damage, damage over time are your 2 big things for offense. You don't really need anything else truly offensively. Move speed, of course, is really good for these farm builds, so I definitely recommend having that. And if you've got some space, intelligence does give you 4% increased damage. So that's pretty nice. All right, as far as the defensive side, this is a little bit different than your standard. Glancing Blow, of course, is still a priority. But after that, you're looking for enough poison protection and health regen to survive your Aura of Decay. Once you have enough of that, and you'll know it because as you use Aura of Decay, you'll notice that your health isn't continuously dwindling. Once you're at that point, then you can start looking at health as a really good option because there's so much leech in this build that having a higher EHP pool, or higher HP pool really, is quite useful and much more powerful than on a lot of builds that don't have the same kind of regen capability. After that, you can look at crit avoidance. You don't have to 100% crit avoidance, but of course it's nice if you do. And finally, other protections, including armor. All right, as far as chase items, there are two that are interesting, and you might want to put on the build if you can find them. Just know that these are really, really not required. The build works perfectly well without them. It's still very powerful, especially offensively. And on the leech as well, which are the two areas we're looking at here. But the two suffixes in particular are damage leached as health while transformed. This will be a very strong option for maintaining your Reaper form. But again, your leech is going to be really high without it, so don't worry if you can't find it. I think the better option here, or the more valuable one, is the increased poison damage and poison protection, since it offers both a defensive and a high offensive option. So if you can find these, they're going to be great. Okay, and the last thing we'll talk about is idols. And idols, in this particular build, you have a lot of options, which is great. And there are some that are maybe a little bit better than others, but they're all pretty close in power. So first thing we'll look at is Poison Prot with Aura of Decay. Of course, this is only as needed. It's a really good way of getting it, because anytime you have Aura of Decay up, you're going to have Poison Prot, so it works really well with it. Another one is Damage While Transformed. This one is just going to further increase that damage. Another defensive option would be 9% less health regen and 9% less damage over time taken, as dots can be pretty unfortunate for a build that requires itself to be in transformation. If you lose that, it's, you know, a bad thing. So being able to get so much damage over time taken or idols is a nice little choice for you if you want to really maintain a hardier build, regardless of where you go on the map, whether there's stuff on the ground or not. Transplant CDR is maybe surprisingly really good, because so much of your damage comes from transplant procs of Rip Blood and its own explosions, that the more often you can do it, the better. And finally, chance to poison on hit, poison damage, and damage over time from the small and humble idols are also a good way to round it out if you've got space for them. That covers it for the gearing, so let's go ahead and get into our final section, which is the rotation. One of the nice things about this build is 2 of the buttons are autocast, so that makes things even simpler than maybe usual. So Aura of Decay, technically not even autocast, you just turn it on, it's just a toggle. So put it on, keep it on, and then turn your Wandering Spirits on autocast, and those 2 things are good to go. The next thing you've got to worry about is maintaining your Reaper form, so of course you're going to turn it on. And then you're going to use Reap pretty much on cooldown, as it's got a really high leech, plus of course the mobility is great, and you'll be applying poison stacks. The other thing you'll be using basically on cooldown is Transplant. Try to transplant relatively close to enemies, because the detonations or the Rip Bloods happen from where you leave, not where you end up. And the only other thing to do is, if you're on a single target enemy and you've got a little bit of time, you can just free cast Rip Blood and put some poison stacks on even faster than you otherwise would, and kill the single target even easier. You can also use this for multi-target, but you really aren't going to need to. I wouldn't much mess with this unless you're confident that you won't get hit. Otherwise, I would just transplant and Reap around the enemies until they die. That is the rotation. Nice and simple, perfect for a farm build. The only thing you have to do is just make sure you don't run out of health in your Reaper form, which means you have to move around a lot and poison things a lot, but that really is mostly just moving around a lot, because then you will poison things a lot. All right, that'll do it for this build guide. I hope you really enjoy poisoning everything on the planet. I myself find it to be a good time, pretty relaxing, as weird as that may sound. It's you know, it's good. It's enjoyable to watch everything just die because it's poisoned to death. But yeah, have a good time with it. If you are enjoying my build guides, if you're enjoying this one in particular, please like and subscribe. It always really helps me. Also, any comments that you might have, anything you might think maybe I can do a little bit better, or if something you really liked, would love to know about it. Also, I stream about 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week on Twitch. I work on my builds there. We do the weekend tournaments that Vision GL puts on. We have a really good time. If you want to come hang out, join chat, just check out what I'm doing. Love to have you there. And finally, I also have a Discord where we have a lot of good conversations about not just Last Epoch, but other ARPGs, other games in general. Although Last Epoch, of course, is the primary game. So if you'd like to join that conversation, please do join the Discord. All right, everyone, have a great time in Last Epoch, and I will see you again real soon.